Come on, guys. It's 2024. A new year. A new start. After 40 years of this, do you think we can come to a peace? Happy New Year, everybody. Sparkster1701 here. And we have a couple of milestones we want to point out. The first one being, I want to give a special shout out to all my viewers and subscribers, because around Thanksgiving we were able to hit 500 subscribers. So I'm very thankful to all of you and grateful as well. And hopefully we'll reach that 1,000 milestone. Hopefully not in as long of a time, but we'll see how that goes. And secondly, what you are taking a look at here is the entire 1984 lineup of Generation 1 Transformers. This is everybody that came out in 1984, 40 years ago. Transformers turns the big 4-0 this year, and I figured we would celebrate with a showcase of every single Transformer that was released that year, as many of these characters have gone on to become incredible legacy figures over the years. So, let's give everybody a moment in the spotlight. First up we'll look at here is Optimus Prime, the leader of the Autobots. Now, despite the fact that he is listed as the leader of the Autobots, his tech spec bio lists him as Commander. Another interesting bit of trivia on this toy. This version of Optimus Prime is one of the few toys from the 1980s that is still in relative active production. There are numerous variants done of this toy out there. Many of them, though, are exclusive to Japan, including 3 special ones that were released at a store called the Bathing Ape. And also go along with it, this version of Optimus Prime also has the most variant pieces, as numerous parts on this toy come in one form or another. So it makes this one a challenge to complete for fans of the old school Prime. Next up, we take a look here at the Decepticon leader, Megatron. One of the more controversial figures ever released due to his alternate mode being a Walther P-38 handgun with some fancy extras. As you can see, barely tell, but this right here is the gun barrel, and it is still painted in the relative gray. It would be when he was available as a mail-away in 1986, 2 years later, that he would get an orange tip to denote him as a toy gun, due to the changing toy laws here in the United States. Interestingly enough, Megatron's original Japanese toy was released in Japan 10 years prior to it being released as a Transformer. Not only was this toy released back in that day, but there were also a handful of others that Takara put out that transformed into guns, including one done of a .44 Magnum. Next up, we'll take a look at some of Megatron's forces, starting with the Seekers. And the first Seeker we have up here is Skywarp. Skywarp was the jokester of the Decepticons and had the special ability of being able to teleport himself short distances. That would make him a rather sneaky and dangerous opponent, if not for the fact that Skywarp is one of the stupidest Decepticons in the ranks. So he needs constant direction from Starscream or Megatron to be able to function as a decent warrior. Skywarp also has the distinction of being the only one of the Seekers to be taken off of the market in 1986. Next up, we have the Seeker everybody loves to hate, Starscream. Starscream was depicted in a lot of the media as being a scientist prior to the war efforts, where he worked alongside Jetfire, who would later defect to the Autobots. This is an interesting side of Starscream that we really never get to see played out much more in any of the media. It's usually glossed over, or just barely seen and then promptly forgotten about, as the mad scientist role more is given to Shockwave on the Decepticons than it is to Starscream. Starscream, of course, is famous for his ever-scheming plots to overthrow Megatron and lead the Decepticons himself. Starscream is also one of the more popular toys, and this version in particular does have quite a few variants, including some exclusive to Japan that were given out to Takara employees that is done up in gold. This version of Starscream also has the distinction of being on toy shelves for 3 years, as he was the only Seeker to still be available at retail in 1986 before finally leaving shelves in 1987. Then lastly, for the Seekers, we have Thundercracker. Thundercracker is often considered the most boring of the 3 Seekers due to the fact that his solid blue colors don't really make him stand out very much. They just seem kinda dull next to Starscream's boisterous personality and the dark black menace that Skywarp brings. Thundercracker is an interesting character in the sense that he was recruited more from Megatron's speeches than out of a need to be a revolutionary. So Thundercracker is the least loyal of a lot of the Decepticons. And while he disappeared from retail in 1986, Thundercracker became a mail-away exclusive through the Stars brochures that were commonly given out around that time with boxed figures. Interestingly enough, the Japanese version of the Stars flyer that advertised this toy removed Thundercracker and replaced him with Dirge. Now we'll move on to Optimus Prime's major soldiers in his army, his Autobot cars. We'll start off here with Blue Streak. Now, Blue Streak was originally released as a blue car, because even the 1984 toy catalog still shows him in the blue color. For whatever reason, the toy was recolored in gray, but the name was never changed. However, there would be a limited figure release. There would be many limited figures released in later versions of the line that would change him back to the blue color. Or they would also change the character's name to Silver Streak. It's a rather long and complicated history. But this mold, like those of the Seekers, did see a fair amount of action for the Transformer line, as it would be used 2 other times throughout the years. Next up, we have Hound, one of the few military-inspired vehicles to be on the Autobot side. as he becomes an army Jeep. But not a Jeep-built Jeep, he's a Mitsubishi-built Jeep. Hound is one of the least popular of the figures due to the fact that he has very poor articulation, but he also has a numerous amount of loose accessories that don't fit on either mode together. Plus, he's also very, very fragile. This one here is one of the few examples that still has the side mirrors here on the chest. Those are quite commonly a missing piece on this toy. Next up in the line we have Ironhide. Of course, Ironhide does things a little differently, as only the front end of the van and the underside of it form the robot. The top side and the passenger areas form some sort of battle platform. This would be parodied again in the War for Cybertron Earthrise line, where the top of the van would be removable and could transform into a platform such as this, or it could become a shield. When Ironhide was first released in Japan, he was actually colored black instead of red. Now, a lot of fans gripe about Ironhide and his buddy Ratchet, since he and Ratchet share the same mold. But when these toys were originally released in the late 70s and early 80s, they were not designed and intended as sentient robots. They were instead powered mecha, which basically had a little guy that would sit right in here behind the windscreen and would be driving it and operating it as a robot battlesuit. However, the Transformer line removed that feature and instead put a sticker on the back of on the front of the seat to give it a head. However, the animators at Sunbow gave Ironhide and Ratchet normal heads, so they would look about the same as the others. There were a set of custom heads built for them that were sold by a third party. Next up here we have Jazz, one of the more popular Autobot characters in the line. Jazz was one of the first to be offered as a mail-away toy, as the Hasbro did run a promotion with Cookie Crisp cereal to allow you to save up enough proofs of purchase and you could buy Jazz. However, that version of Jazz omits a few of the labels that are featured on the retail version. A friend of mine years ago did see that version of Jazz, but sadly, she did not pick him up. A testament to part of Jazz's popularity was the fact that he was voiced in the animated series by Scatman Crothers, who many of the other voice actors had said was a pleasure to work with, as he was often in between takes found playing his guitar and singing. Sadly, Scatman died shortly after the release of the 1986 animated film. While the third season had been in production and Jazz was intended to be a part of it, sadly, a lot of Jazz's lines would have been reassigned to other characters, and Jazz would slowly fade into the background as the series went on. Next up, we have Mirage. Mirage was the spy for the Autobots, and was a popular character primarily due to the fact that he had an ability in the cartoon that allowed him to become invisible. And he did make frequent use of it. The toy's bio lists Mirage as being somebody who's not fully behind the cause of the Autobots, and that he can't really be trusted. This would be exploited more in a Season 2 episode, where it was painted that Mirage was a traitor. However, that proved to be false, but it has been a storyline that has been explored in a lot of the other media. Next up, we have Prow. Prow shares the same alternate mode design as Blue Streak, and also with Smokescreen, who came out the following year, though Prow takes it a bit differently by being a police car. And he does carry a lot of the marks for his original toy, as he has a special marking on his stickers that denotes him for being a Japanese police car. And the sticker sheet shown in the instruction manual shows the original toy's sticker sheet, where he could be labeled as a police car for several cities in Japan. Prowl served as a strategist for the Autobots, but was also seen as second in command under Optimus Prime. Next up, we have Ratchet. Ratchet shares the same mold with Ironhide, but is modified slightly to be an ambulance. This would leave the Autobots having every emergency vehicle, although it would take until 1985 before they would get the last one they were missing, a fire truck. Ratchet was one of the first toys to be given a variant due to the fact that the 1984 release had the symbol of the Red Cross on him. It would be on the roof of the van, and there would be stickers on his hands that would feature it. Sadly, a lot of folks don't realize is that the symbol of the Red Cross is a trademarked symbol, and permission has to be given by the Red Cross to use it. As you'll probably notice it in several media, as well as with toys like Ratchet here, as his release in '85 had the symbol removed entirely. Next up, we have Sideswipe, one of the more violent and savage warriors in Optimus Prime's lineup. It's shown that Sideswipe has a jetpack mounted to his backside, and that was mentioned in the cartoon. However, the toy does not have that feature. It looks more prominent on his brother Sunstreaker, but for whatever reason, their bios were switched during pre-production. Sideswipe remains a popular figure amongst the fans due to his sleek automotive alternate mode of a Lamborghini Countach, which became famous only about 3 years prior to Sideswipe's release, as it gained fame for being seen in the 1981 film The Cannonball Run. Was one of the first times ever that a Lamborghini Countach had been shown in worldwide media. And in those opening moments of the film, it became an icon. Next up, we have Sunstreaker. He serves as the twin brother to Sideswipe, as we just mentioned, but he's also the more flashy of the warriors, and extremely self-confident. There isn't a thing Sunstreaker can do and do better than anybody else around. Just ask him, he'll tell you. Sunstreaker here is also one of the more tragic stories in the Transformer toy lineup. Hasbro would have Takara lease out the molds to other companies around the world so that many other smaller companies, such as ones in Latin America, could mass produce their own toy versions of these toys. And many of them have become quite popular in recent years as they've become more discovered. Sadly, during the process of that for Sunstreaker, the mold was either lost or destroyed. So, fans who have long been hoping for a reissue or some sort of commemorative version of this version of Sunstreaker will have to miss out, because due to that mold being gone, one cannot be produced. Coming up near the end of the line, we have Trailbreaker. Trailbreaker served as a defensive unit for the Autobots because he could project a very powerful energy shield. However, it was very taxing on his energy reserves, so he had to use it sparingly. Trailbreaker's alternate mode was that of a Toyota Hilux pickup truck. For a time in Japan, there was actually a law on the books that any toy company that was manufacturing toy cars and trucks had to include the Toyota Hilux in some form or another in its lineup. That's why both the Transformers and the GoBots both have a Toyota Hilux in their lineup, as the GoBots got Smallfoot and the Transformers got Trailbreaker. Although the mold would be shared again the following year with Hoist, although Hoist would gain a tow feature. Lastly, for the Autobot cars, we have Wheeljack. Wheeljack served as a mechanical engineer for the Autobots and was constantly devising all sorts of weapons and equipment. But not always the best, due to the fact that many of them did suffer explosive breakdowns not too long into their use. The original toy for Wheeljack came in two forms when it was released in Japan. We would have this one that we were given in the Transformer line, which was marked on a real car that advertised an Italian airline. But there was also another one that was released in Japan that had markings for Marlboro cigarettes. However, since Takara did not have permission from either the airline or the Siggies, they ended up changing the name to say Marlboro. That version would later get redone up in some of the Japanese exclusive toys, and recently an American release, and they would call that the Marlboro version Exhaust. He would be a Decepticon and would supposedly have a nagging cough from being sponsored by a cigarette company. To round off the Decepticon army, we have the cassettes and communicators. We'll start with the big communicator himself, Soundwave. Soundwave, of course, serves as their communications officer and is a good friend to Megatron. So his loyalty to the Decepticon cause is never questioned. In his original Japanese toy, Soundwave did include with him a set of earbuds so that you could plug them into him and he would act like a microcassette player. However, since he did not have a working player inside of him, this was basically just for show. Probably mainly in the hopes that you could show other kids that you had more than they did. So, sometimes faking it works best. Taking a look at the cassettes, we start off with Buzzsaw. Buzzsaw is often the more forgotten of the cassette figures due to the fact that he was included with Soundwave. Buzzsaw did actually make an appearance in the cartoon, but very minimally did he ever appear. The main reason for that is due to the fact that since he was included with Soundwave, he was already being advertised just by extension. So Buzzsaw has often been left to be forgotten in the annals of history. Next up we have Frenzy. And I know a lot of fans are going to argue with me out there that the blue guy is Rumble, but that was featured in the cartoon. The original toys had the colors reversed. And if you go out asking for a G1 version at any place that you visit, you need to ask for the right one. So in G1 terms, Frenzy is blue. At least toy-wise. Now that we got that out of the way, Frenzy here has the distinction of being the only cassette figure to stay on the line for 4 years, whereas everybody else was retired within 3 years. Frenzy also has the distinction of being the only cassette figure to change partners. When he was reissued in 1986, he was released with Ratbat instead of Laserbeak. There's also there's a few noticeable changes between the 84 and the 86 version of Frenzy. And we're not going to pick him up. Frenzy's partner in crime on the shelves in 84 and 85 was Laserbeak. Laserbeak was one of the more prominent characters to be shown in the cartoon, likely due to the fact that his ability to fly gave him a further range than many of the others. Laserbeak serves as the interrogator, mainly because he's too much of a coward to be in a real fight. That's why he likes being in interrogation. Most of the people he would be seeing have already been battered and bewildered from the battlefield, and thus they'd be afraid of him. However, Laserbeak is a known coward among the Autobots, and all it would take is a simple lunge at him, and Laserbeak will be headed for the hills. Laserbeak has the distinction of being the only flying cassette figure to have been featured in the live-action films, as he appeared in Dark of the Moon, and played a lot of prominent roles in that film. Next up we have Ravage. Ravage, of course, was called Jaguar in the original Japanese media. He also was a very popular character. His animal mode certainly made him an interesting figure to deal with, and gave him a different attack style than many of his comrades. Ravage has the distinction of being the only cassette figure to have appeared twice in the live-action films. He featured a fair amount in the movie Revenge of the Fallen, and had a brief appearance very early on in Bumblebee. Lastly, we have Ravage's partner in crime on the toy shelves, Rumble. Rumble, of course, made a lot of appearances in the cartoon, as he would be one of the many that Soundwave would unleash. Rumble became famous due to the fact that he had pile drivers that he would convert from his arms to be able to cause the mini earthquakes that he was famous for doing in the show. It would not be until more modern releases came out before Rumble would actually get a set of pile drivers to use. Lastly, we'll take a look at the mini vehicles that served under Optimus Prime. We'll start off with Brawn here. Brawn is a little tiny titan of power, as it's said that he is the second strongest of all the Autobots that were in the Ark, which means that his strength is only rivaled in the Autobots by Optimus Prime. Brawn would be given a significant makeover in the cartoon, giving him an actual face, unlike what his toy came with. The toy's mold would be redone in 1986 to make Outback. Brawn also has the distinction of being the first character in the animated film to die. Next up, we have Bumblebee, the little Volkswagen Beetle that has become an enormously popular character. Although in recent times, he's been more seen being a Camaro, something sleek and sporty. However, Bumblebee did have signs of his greatness back in the Generation 1 line. Bumblebee has the distinction of being the only character to have 4 toys released in the Generation 1 lineup. He would be given a Pretender form and an Action Master form, but before those two came out, he would be redone as a Throttlebot, and he would change his name to Goldbug. Next up, we have Cliffjumper, who sort of shares a similar mold with Bumblebee, but instead of being a Volkswagen Beetle, he becomes a Porsche. Cliffjumper was voiced in the animated cartoon by legendary voice actor and disc jockey Casey Kasem, which a lot of fans have noticed the irony of that when in the animated film, the person who did the countdown for the ship launch was Cliffjumper. However, Kasem would leave the show over an episode that was produced in the 3rd season, which depicted Arabs in a negative light, even though at that time, with the conflicts and tensions in Libya and the Middle East, it was a way of Transformers trying to politicize things that we really didn't have any business being in. With his departure from the series, Cliffjumper's toy would also be taken off of shelves. The mold, however, would get modified slightly to become Hubcap in 1986. Next up, we have Gears. Gears was the antisocial character on the Transformers. His mold would be redone in 86 to make Swerve. Gears gained prominence in the comic book run since the comic books were published by Marvel Comics. And while Gears is often known as being an antisocial loner, he did, however, during those years in the comic books, would become best friends with Spider-Man. Next up, we have Huffer. Huffer was a construction engineer for the Autobots, and could often build things out of seemingly impossible stuff. Huffer was also one of the ones that was more easily depressed and homesick for Cybertron, since the Autobots did not have easy access to spaceships or a space bridge to take them back. Huffer's mold would be retooled in 86 to make pipes. Something done in the cartoon, erroneously, that didn't work out with the toy was that an episode featured Huffer taking Optimus's trailer after Optimus had been gravely wounded in a battle with Megatron. Huffer opted to take the load for him. However, the Generation 1 toys were not designed at the same time, meaning that that was impossible to do. That would be an error that would be rectified in the Kingdom line for War for Cybertron, as a Prime with the trailer had been released the year prior in Earthrise. Hasbro and Takara made sure during Kingdom to design a Huffer that could pull Optimus's trailer. Next up, we have Windcharger. Windcharger is a transformer that showed signs of suffering from Earth mental illnesses, as he does come with ADHD. He has a hard time focusing his attention on things for long periods of time. While this was never depicted in the cartoon, it is listed on his tech spec bio that he does have a very short attention span. He's also got one of the more popular alternate modes for fans as he transforms into a Trans Am. Of course, in the cinema world and world of entertainment in general, Trans Ams have been a famous and favorite car, as we saw it 3 times in the Smokey and the Bandit films. And also, around the time the Transformers were being released, there was one on television weekly on the TV series Knight Rider. However, both of those Trans Ams were in a black color, unlike Windcharger being in red. In more modern times, there was a set of these small Transformers done up as keychains. And there would be a different colored variant for them. Windcharger, in that version, would get released in a variant color of black. Probably as an homage to the popularity of the black Trans Am. Now, before we bow out, we take one look at a special figure that was secretly included in the line but never cataloged. This is Bumblejumper, or Bumper as many of the fans have come to refer to him as. He was packaged inadvertently in packages of Bumblebee or Cliffjumper, hence his name. So while he hasn't been given much notoriety, he has gained a slight following. He has his own unique alternate form of a Mazda sporty car. The downside is that he's played off as being a super rare transformer, and that's been driving up his price. In reality, while he is somewhat on the rare side, he's not that rare or that hard to find. Lastly, we have Bumblejumper. He was a figure released on cards for Bumblebee and Cliffjumper, hence his name, but he's also been called Bumper in recent years, probably because it's easier to say. Bumblejumper here was inadvertently included in the line, but he never got anything official. However, released in Latin American countries, he was made an official character, as I do have a guidebook that does show him in there, and he was even given his own tech spec file. So, somewhere in the world, somebody appreciates Bumper. However, people have long been making the distinction that he's a super rare figure and commands high prices. In reality, Bumblejumper here does not really command that high of a price due to the fact that he's not really as rare as people think he is. And that wraps up our lineup of the 1984 run of Transformers. I hope all of you enjoyed this trip down memory lane with me. Please do remember that if you like the content that we feature here on this channel, I would appreciate a like, a share, a comment, and even a subscription if you haven't done so already. Now, many of these guys have been reviewed on my channel before, but over the course of the year, I am going to give each and every one of these guys a new updated review. Those will come out randomly, so do keep an eye out for them. Especially if you're a subscriber, make sure you ring that bell so you get notified when they go up. This is Sparkster1701 saying I will catch you all later.